G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle. This is a second or third attempt recording this video because I just evolved off into a rant about Imperial Fist fanboys at one point. um, yeah, I'll get into why later. Can't help it, keeps happening. But with the possible announcement of Epic coming with Adepticon, everyone seems to strongly think it's coming, and it wouldn't shock me. I decided to go through and look at these releases, Aeronautica and Titanicus, because Aeronautica and Titanicus, obviously the models built for those systems will directly play into Epic, because they provide a bunch of additional stuff that Epic can use as a game system. So I decided to list all of the releases that I could find for them. And I think I've covered it all, but I may have missed one or two things. If I have, I strongly apologise for it. But you can see I've gone through, found the item, found the release date. Third category over here is the Horus Heresy 2.0 and the releases for that game system, which I've separated out. And this video is entirely unscripted, as you're probably quickly figuring out. But I just wanted to analyse the data because it's always interesting to analyse data. So, Aeronautica and Titanicus both were games that went straight through the COVID period, so they're affected by COVID in some capacity. Now, it's very interesting to analyse what that capacity could be, because if we take Aeronautica, well, the system released not long before COVID began to hit, so you could argue that a lot of these 2020 releases were items that had been sculpted or worked with prior to COVID. I personally don't believe that's the case. I think they knock out a lot of this shit in about 6 weeks. That's just me, though. I'm very cynical when it comes to that because, well, let's take something like the Horus Heresy rules, okay? They tell us that they worked on them for 2 years in advance, and yet you see them, you read them, and you go, well, hang on, a lot of these errors were brought to the attention of the writers in the playtesting stage, and it was only 4 months or so from when they were given the stage 3 or phase 3 playtesting to the print edition of the book being showcased. So 4 months is not 2 years, last I checked. And it also means that they went to the printers well before that 4 months in order to actually get printed as a sample copy even, and sent off to Games Workshop to use in their promotional material. So if the rules have gone through that, what's to say that a lot of these units didn't go through that same process? Sure, it can take quite a lot of time for something to go through the many stages of conceptualization to becoming a physical model. Yes, it can also take very little time. Ask anyone who's done 3D sculpting, things like Patreon, for example. If I want to use a good example of how quickly something can go from a STL or a digital nothingness to a full 3D render, you can go and watch people doing, say, shoulder pads. Okay, shoulder pads and helmets for Space Marines. I think on the day that any single one of the different legions had something premiered on Warhammer Community, like say, here's Iron Warriors helmets, within the day, they were up on sites like My Mini Factory, Colts 3D, Thingiverse as STLs. One day. Alright, if this was Forge World, they could not only make those STLs, print them in their 3D printer in a couple of hours. They have a high-end 3D printer there, it's how they make everything, for their mold masters, not how they make all the actual models they ship to you. They print the item, they then cover it in mold release, and then they stick it in a silicon mold. Okay, that whole process, which I might even showcase on the channel for the curious. I tell you what, later this year, I will get a Necromunda / Realm of Battle type tile, and I will cast it in resin to show you that full process. How's that sound for a deal? To prove how quickly you can take something from a physical object and recreate it. It's actually a very quick process. So anyway, that in mind, apparently a lot of this stuff, half of which is Forge World, half of which is plastic, is affected to some degree by COVID. And maybe we see that in the fact that there was only 4 releases in all of 2021 for the system, and only 4 releases in 2022 for the system. So that's 8 releases in 3 years for Aeronautica. Last I checked, 8 is not a high number when it comes to releases, because you'll see 4 releases in the average Marine set that comes out annually to 6 monthly even. And then we have Titanicus. Titanicus is another funny one because that comes out 5 years ago. Well, actually, we'll say 4.5 years ago. So the actual Titans produced for the system is Direwolf, Warmaster, and the Nemesis Warbringer. So 3 Titans in 4.5, closing in on 5 years. So let's say a year and a half. Every year and a half, you get a Titan. Which means we're not due for another Titan till the end of this year. Sorry, Titanicus players, but you can go fuck yourselves. And it's a very strange thing, because if I was looking after Titanicus, I would be trying to take out a page out of Battletech's book. I'd be going, geez, we have an awful lot of mechanical units in our back catalogue. Why don't we make them all and sell them? That's a pretty cool idea. Like, it's called Adeptus Titanicus, not Adeptus Knights. So, how come we've had one knight every year and a half for the system? There should be so many more knights coming, but the best they can do is things like auto-sinister upgrades. In fact, there are twice as many upgrades released for Titanicus, usually as single weapons, by the way. Things like the Reaver Titan single missile rack on its back, or single Vulcan Mega Bolter. Single items produced for the game than there are actual Titans. It is insane to see. So yeah, not an awful lot going on in Titanicus. There are 4 books released for Titanicus, and oddly enough, they keep releasing them only a few months apart. And this is where things like bloat comes from. Because if you're going to release campaign books just a couple of months apart, in the case of Doom of Moloch and Beta Garmin, 3 months. 2 days under 3 months, technically. When books are that close together, just print them in the same fucking book. It's not like Beta Garmin and Doom of Moloch had so much content blowing out of the pages, they just couldn't contain it all. They had a very fat man sit on top of the book to try and crush the pages close, and he couldn't quite do it. Yeah, it's not like that at all, right? They're just trying to break these things up and sell it to you, because they love money, which, let's be honest, it's Games Workshop, it shouldn't come as a surprise. So, if one was a guessing person, based off this trend, and this is the trend, and this is the trend all specialist games follow, what bets could you make for Epic? Well, common theme, initial release box, and then in the initial few months after release, additional units that are kind of needed for the core game, but they couldn't be asked to put in the main box. So imagine a box that contains something like, Marines, Terminators, Command Squads, Rhinos, Land Raiders, that kind of thing, like the old starter box for Epic did. But just Marines, we don't want to go adding in other factions. That's a bit of work, Starter sets are way easier when you only put one faction in them. You see, for these 2-player games, that's why Aeronautica, all Imperials on release. Titanicus, all the same types of Titans on release. Heresy 2.0, all the same Marines on release, but just paint them in 2 different faction colours and we'll call it a day. Very common theme. I'm fine with creating starter sets that are one faction only. This is something I've actually suggested them do, but I suggested they make multiple side-by-side starter sets so that people come into the shops and someone can go, oh, I like Eldar, and you give him the Eldar starter set. And his friend turns and says, oh, I like Marines, you give him the Marine starter set. Rather than forcing them to buy a starter set with 2 different factions, one of whom they don't care for, especially if they're both Marine players, a box that's full of Eldar miniatures, half full of Eldar miniatures, half full of Marines, is going to displease them because they're going to go, what do I do with all these Eldar miniatures, okay? So that's why I suggest, these boxes should have a single faction box, but have another box on another shelf with another faction in it to give people actual variety. It's what I always wish they added to start collecting boxes, is like dice and tape measures and stuff, made an actual start collecting set. Anyway, those days are long gone. So back to this though. So then, 3 to 4 months down the line, you'll have got all of the initial release wave out of the way, and then the company will forget the game exists for about 6 months, because they've already run it through all their community people, they've already done all these videos on with influencers and such, and you know, they drag them on out of YouTube and out of Instagram, give them a starter set, they make one video on the starter set, and then you never hear about that starter set ever again. Haven't we seen that theme before? I've complained about it multiple times because I just think it's the lowest form of marketing. Pick someone who's truly passionate about the subject, not just a shill, and give it to them, because they'll have a baked-in player base for the subject and they'll actually do something with it. Alright? It's less important to give someone like, say, Zorpazorp Heresy miniatures, because Zorpazorp is not a huge Heresy guy. At least that's not what his community is tailored towards. But you give him a bunch of Middle-earth stuff, well, his community is with him because they love Middle-earth. That's where he built his name, his reputation. Right? You don't come to me because you want to hear about how great Games Workshop is. You come to the Outer Circle because you want to hear about how the business works, and you want some consumer advocacy, or you love the taste of salt, whatever it may be, right? If I suddenly change my branding from that to, oh, hey, here's a bunch of free stuff I got given from Games Workshop, what do you think the people in the comments would say? Especially if I was really, really nice about it, which pretty much all of your community contributors happen to be, because you made them sign a contract saying they would be. Yeah. So don't do that, but it keeps happening. So I imagine if Epic does come out at Adepticon, you're going to see exactly that. Real out of person. Yeah, I imagine it's like Hannibal Lecter. They bring in an influencer and he's strapped to a little like gurney and he's got a little face mask on. And they go, here's the starter set for our game, paint it however you like, let us put it on Warhammer Community, make a video about it. Yep, done, cool. Alright, see you in 6 months for 40k 10th edition. Can you come and paint that set when you're ready? Cool. And you'll never hear about the system again from them. You know, how many videos... I'd be very genuinely curious, people in the comments right below, how many of your favourite influencers that got given box sets do you know of that they just never revisited the box set after that like initial launch window? Okay, they only visited as long as they were getting free crap. I'd be genuinely curious to know. Because again, I just think it's the lowest form of marketing, when you could go find someone who's genuinely passionate about that subject, and they will rave about it all day for better or worse. But anyway, because of this, you know how the release is going to go. Now, to swap topics a little bit and try and get back on track, because I've wandered all over the place, Heresy 2.0 releases. So, color-coded them, and pre-release is all these items here. Now, box set's a little misleading, because obviously that contains Tactical Marines, 2 different Praetors, Tempted Dreadnought, Spartans, so that's 5 new units in there, plus containing 10 Terminators, but we don't count those. So on the 7th of May alone, they announced 1, 2, 3, 4 different things, or different items. Special and heavy weapons, which ended up being, I think, 3 or 4 boxes, because you've got special weapons set, you've got the heavy weapons set, which has, you know, missile launcher, another one that has, like, you know, las cannons and all that kind of thing, because they couldn't fit them all in the one box, it was just too hard. Fine, whatever, done. So, 7th of May, huge day. And Imperial Fist, this is where, I mentioned at the start of the episode, I went on Imperial Fist rant. I don't consider the Imperial Fist to be the poster boys of the Heresy, and I know many people do, and they like to sit there in the comments and cite to me how the Siege of Terror is so important in the Horus Heresy. I get where they're coming from, I honestly do, but the Siege of Terror is the last 5 minutes of the Horus Heresy. I would argue that the first 5 minutes, Isstvan 5, is just as critical, and I think it still makes the best starting point for the Horus Heresy, because it is the starting point. It's the divergence point where, you know, things are only a little bit chaosy. The Space Marines on the opposite side of the battlefield at Isstvan 5 are potentially redeemable from the point of view of the Loyalists, right? Whereas the Space Marines on the opposite side by the Siege of Terror are utterly irredeemable. Okay? Very interesting dichotomy at play there. And the Horus Heresy lasts 13 years. And for 12 of those 13 years, the Imperial Fists are busy building walls on Terra, while literally every other legion is doing the fighting and the dying. And you can argue that there are niche examples where the Imperial Fists get involved. Oh, they're at the Siege of Cathonia that we made up 5 minutes ago, and they sent a retribution fleet that you'd never heard about until John French wrote A Crimson Fist. Whatever. The Ultramarines lose 100,000 Marines on the first day of the fucking Battle of Calth. That's a contribution to the Horus Heresy. And the Ultramarines are overlooked in the Horus Heresy. The Dark Angels are fighting the war, and they're fighting at Thramis, crushing the Night Lords into oblivion. They actually, one of the few Loyalist legions that succeeds in utterly devastating a traitor legion. The Blood Angels are the first legion fighting demons in the Horus Heresy. Obviously, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, the Iron Hands all suffer terribly at Isfahan 5. They're all in it from the start. So they, along with other factions such as the White Scars and the Space Wolves, are fighting just this constant campaign. Yeah, I just don't get the Imperial Fist love and why they're the poster children, especially because they have a colour scheme that's a pain to paint, but they've been blessed with models, blessed with special characters. They've got all their special characters. They've got all their models. They've got upgrades specific to their legion, like storm shields. No one else has the privilege. Salamanders use storm shields. They haven't got models for that unless you want to buy fire drakes and use theirs. And of course, the Imperial Fists and the Sons of Horus, multiple special characters, and they got these releases before the system even dropped. So that's basically the direction that Ranto went in originally, and I swore a lot more as well, as you can imagine, because it just annoys me the way it gets defended, instead of just accepting that, hey, you're spoilt as a legion if you play Imperial Fists, and you wonder why people roll their eyes at them. Anyway, is what it is. So I then went and I tallied up all the releases from release day, because all this stuff came out before release day, and that's where these numbers on the right came from. So 56 releases, 16 of which were before the system even dropped. So 40 releases. So out of those 40 releases, that sounds like a lot of releases for the Horus Heresy on the surface. 2 of them are books. 38 releases. 18 were Legion-specific upgrades, helmets, and a shoulder pad. All of a sudden, you've halved it from 40 releases for the system since launch to 20. Now take away the 4 upgrades for existing units that should have come in the fucking box. Contemptor weapons, Leviathan weapons, and Predator extra weapons. Take away those releases. I think there was one more actually, the Despoiler hands and swords. All things that probably should have come in, Despoiler arms, a sprue of arms. I'm sure they could have fitted that into the Tactical Squad release box, but I digress. Now specific faction units, so Kabanda, Empress Children, Praetor, models that can only be used by one particular niche faction, or in particular sub-faction within the game. A sub-faction is obviously, you're not just a Space Marine, you're a specific type of Space Marine, like a White Scar. If your character sits into that category, it is a specific sub-faction. So the actual releases to the system now goes down to 9. And of those 9, 7 are Tonks. The Predator tank, the Land Raider, the Whirlwind Scorpius, Typhon, Cerberus, Seeker and Venator, and Vindicator. Not all of these have actually been released yet. I've just used the dates of announcement. So the actual releases for the Legiones Astartes that all the different legions can and will use is the Esoterrorist and Jet Bikes. 2 units in 1 year. Now again, you can make the argument that everyone can use tanks. Yes, let's see how many Cerberus tanks you can fit into your legion, and at what points you'll do it, because they are a Lord of War choice and cannot take up more than 1/4 of your points in any given game. So that narrows down the amount of those you're going to see. Then let's look at something like the Whirlwind Scorpius. Whirlwind Scorpius, eh? I guess you can take a few of those in your list. Of course, many Rights of War won't allow you to take more than one heavy support. Land Raiders, yeah, you can take a few of those. Costs a lot of points, though. Predator Tank. Well, they're not great. They're not terrible either. So, maybe we can make an argument for these things. But when we look at it, what could have been? And it's very interesting to me because, again, the things I would do differently, were I running the company, as someone who has run a company, I would have released a boxed set around Christmas time for Heresy 2.0. And it would have been something like Blood Angels versus Death Guard. Something like that. Or Blood Angels versus Iron Warriors. That'd probably be a really good set. Blood Angels versus Iron Warriors. And I would have given the Blood Angels, I would have given them the jet bikes and assault marines in that box set. And on the opposite side of that box set, I would have made breaches and a Deredeo Dreadnought in plastic. Now, this is not I sat down, I spent hours and hours figuring this out, and I spoke to my marketing department. I just know as a person who actually has played this game, unlike the marketing department of Games Workshop, what would probably sell really, really well. And that box would sell really, really well. Especially if you tied it in with some sort of interesting campaign book or reason for getting it. That would be pretty great. So, yeah. But anyway, I digress. This is releases so far in this year for Heresy, or in the last year for Heresy. And of course, their releases for Aeronautica and Titanicus in their totality. And it's very, very interesting to just, look at these things, measure them up and see where they actually sit in the big scheme of things. Because it's not a lot. If you tally up all of the Titanicus releases, just for that game system in 5 years, and you compare it to all of the releases for something like the Primaris Marines in 5 years, that one particular, albeit the most popular faction, for 40k, is going to vastly outweigh all of Titanicus, which is a game in and of itself, right? And it's even worse for Aeronautica. And now the company wants to turn around and drop potentially, I have to really emphasize this, the potentially factor, they want to turn around and drop Epic on us. Well, if this is the best they can do for Aeronautica, and if this is the best they can do for Titanicus, if that's all the units for both those game systems they can do, granted, COVID happened, get the fuck over it, it's been and gone. If that's the best they can do, what the hell were they going to do for Epic? And, at the same time as this, what the hell are they going to do for Warhammer the Old World? Did a video on it yesterday. What the hell are they going to do for the Old World? Because that's potentially 2 new specialist game systems that need all of their shit, right? And look at Heresy 2.0. 2 books, like 2 other factions, Liber Imperium, Liber Mechanicum. Still haven't got Militia and Cults. Still haven't got Demons of the Ruinstorm proper. You could make an argument I could add one last little column down the bottom there for... they got Ruinstorm Allies PDF, which is 2 units. Realistically, it's 2 units. It's a HQ and his attendants and brutes. 2 units. It's not exactly rocking the Casbah there. So, if one can release in 5 years, what is this, including just weapons, decals, upgrade bullshit and books, everything combined, 27 units for Titanicus, does that mean we'll be sitting here in 5 years' time having a video about how Warhammer, the Old World, had 15 things released, and Epic had another 12 things released, and they told you to just use stuff from Aeronautica to fill it out? Is that the conversation we need to be having? Because I don't want to be having that conversation. This is the stuff that I say is a genuine problem, and yet, I don't know, people just pay it off. They just ignore it. They just go, it'll be fine. Yeah, they haven't released it yet. You're being a naysayer. I'm not a naysayer. At least not in this instance. Like, they haven't got their shit together for 5 consecutive years for some of these game systems. Like, Like, you go through, repeat this exercise at home yourself. Track the actual releases for Necromunda, for Blood Bowl, for Kill Teams, and actually see what it tallies out to over the years those systems have been around. You'll be surprised how many items are like single miniature, character, decal, weapon upgrade that should have been in the basic box but isn't. You'd be surprised how much of that you come across. And go through, repeat the exercise for all different systems, and you'll see just how thin on the ground this shit is spread. I mean, half of you probably even forgot Aeronautica is a thing that is still currently sold and apparently still in development because they haven't closed it out in any way, shape, or form. And yet we're asking them to also give us Epic and Battlefleet Gothic and Warhammer the Old World. Come on. Come on. You know? This is turning to shit fast. Okay? So, I make no two bones about it. This is unsustainable. Okay? You can't give every faction and every game system love. They have finite resources, finite manufacturing capacity, and if they're doing a big 10th edition release, they're going to be trying to pump out crap for that. And if they're pumping out crap for 10th edition, what production capacity does that leave everything else? It doesn't. So, awful lot of issues here. Anyway, that's it for me. This is a very rambling episode. I do understand. I do apologise. Completely unscripted, but sometimes it's nice to just look at the data and just let a bit of emotion take hold, analyse it critically, but, you know, talk about the facts as we see them. And if you interpret this data completely differently to me and think that it's all success, the sunshine and rainbows, great. See you in the comments. The one thing I don't want to hear in the comments, though, is Imperial Fist people going, no, they are the face of the heresy, because I will find you like fucking Liam Neeson. I will find you. Anyway, make it the other circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.